There's no reason in the world to spend $1 out of your pocket or a minute out of your life building a brand you don't own. We all know those entrepreneurs who are going to agonize for months over how their logo should look like and not even bother to launch their product to the market and see if the market even cares. Happiness in the future is not the reward for misery today. You want to make sure that you won't be that person who is going to end up building a brand that's valuable only to find out that it's not yours.
Welcome to Success in Mind, the podcast for driven entrepreneurs ready to rewire their thinking to create success on their terms. I'm Teri, Holland, and I will help you to do just that through high-performance coaching and hypnotherapy. I'm here to help you overcome fear, ditch the self-doubt, and tap into unstoppable clarity. If you're ready to align your mindset with your goals, you are in the right place. Let's get your success locked in. Andrei, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. Good to be here again.
Reason why I knew I needed to have you back was I was teaching my podcast training last week, and all of these questions started coming up about trademarks and copywriting as it relates to the creator space. So for podcasters and YouTube and our social media content. And I thought, well, I know the exact person who could answer these questions because I can't. So here we are.
I'll do my best.
Perfect. Thank you. I know we talked about this last time, but I think it's important to start here again. And that is, what is the difference between a trademark and a copyright?
Yeah. So copyright protects content for how it's expressed. Like use this concept of magic words, right? To me, the magic word for copyright is how, because copyright doesn't protect the underlying idea behind what you're teaching, but how you're doing it, like the sequence of words that you've used to express that idea, or the actual video that you put out, or if it's a longer course, like the sequence of modules, like all of that could be protected by copyright. And again, that protects content, the words, the videos, the images, the music, the software behind it. And trademarks, they protect the brand, which is the name, the logo, the tagline, and in the coaching space, sometimes also the visual representation of the system. Like, for example, Bob Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant. That's a perfect representation of the ESBI. He knew that he couldn't protect the knowledge around it as his own, but he can get a monopoly over the quadrant where basically just he wrote 4 letters in it, trademarked it, and now nobody can teach it that same way. So that's the function of a trademark. A trademark, and we can talk a little bit more about this, the difference between, because everyone says, brand is not just your logo, and they're right. So, the brand is what they say about you when you're not in the room, and that's cute, but also somewhat true. So there's a big difference between the brand as something big, amorphous, that, kind of a feel good thing, and brand symbols or brand elements, right? Because the brand, as amorphous and feel good as it is, still has those elements that people specifically remember about you. Whether it's the name of the product, the name of the service, the logo that they saw, that just do it as a tagline, or some of those little things. And big brands have dozens, some of them have hundreds, some of them have thousands of them. So they're brand elements that can and should be trademarked, because that's like, if something is working for you, something was working toward you having that good, that valuable, feel good, amorphous thing as a brand, you want to own as many of them as you can. And that's what the big brands always do.
Okay, so that makes sense. So what should podcasters and YouTubers be considering when it comes to trademarking and copyright?
Really depends on what it is that they're trying to accomplish with that. Because I mean, I can always say, yeah, you got to trademark everything, and you got to, not really. A trademark, just like any other type of intellectual property, is not the goal. It's the means to an end. And if the goal for the podcast or the YouTube channel is for them to get recognized under a certain brand, be known for something so that it becomes a business for them, then those are the things you want to own. Because one of my favorite sayings that I came up with is that there is no reason in the world to spend $1 out of your pocket or a minute out of your life building a brand you don't own. If that's what you're doing, if you're actually building a brand, you want to build something that you can own and that you do own. And a lot of people find themselves in the situation when they are building something that they can't even own, and there's no reason to do that. So, but if all you're doing is you're just having fun, posting, you playing a game online, every week or so, and you're not ever planning to monetize it, you're not ever planning to make a product out of that, you're just having fun and you don't really care what the brand is, there's no reason for you to spend any resources trying to own it, because again, you're not building a brand. You're
Right.
just using a platform, the free platform, to share your content with the world, right? So from your question, I'm assuming that we're talking about those who are actually trying to do something with it.
Yeah.
With podcasts is hard work. I know, because I've tried doing the interviews on both sides like extensively last year, and I realized how much effort it takes. So if you're actually doing this, there's no reason to do it in a way that you're not building an asset for yourself. So the way I look at that is the brand really is the most important part of what it is that you're building in a podcast, because every single episode by itself, like, yeah, it is automatically protected by copyright. So the beauty with copyright is that it's protected automatically by virtue of you having created it. Like when a musician writes the song, when they finish the song, whether they sing it on, to their iPhone, or they write it in notation, or they put it in their digital workstation, it's protected by copyright the second he's done, right?
Wow.
The content in written form, like for example, when you write an email to someone, if there's something creative in it, you have copyright on it the second you press send, right? You don't need to go to the government, pay them anything for it to be recognized as your work of authorship. It's, I mean, it's harder to prove without it, but you own it. It's very different with trademarks. You own nothing without you actually being able to prove it. So going back to podcast, like every single episode by itself is not really that valuable in
Mhm.
terms of contribution to to you money making. It becomes valuable because it becomes a series, it becomes something that people tune into, whether it's every day, every month, or every week, whatever the frequency of what you do. Like if you think of Joe Rogan, if you look at every single episode, as interesting and as provoking as they might be, if you only had one, it's not a brand. That's not where the value lies. That's not why everyone's dreaming to be on this show, right? It's because he's built this accumulation of, well, branding, right? And that's why JRE is so valuable, uh,
Right.
on top of his face, right? And so I don't know what he's going to do with that, right? Maybe there's value to the brand even after Joe is no longer doing it. And you
Yeah.
could still have Joe Rogan experience maybe without Joe Rogan, right? And again, that's another thing for you to think about when you're building the brand. Is it just about you, or is it about the brand of the show? So those are the things that you want to think about. I know that it's hard to think about those things when you're just starting out, when you have like 3 listeners and 2 of them are your immediate family.
Yeah.
And I know it's hard, but I think at some point when you continue doing this, and you realize you want to keep doing it for some time, you want to ask yourself a question: what's the end goal here? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Are you ready to turn your ideas into income? With Kajabi, you can create, market, and sell your online courses, memberships, and coaching programs all in one easy-to-use platform. No tech headaches, no juggling multiple tools, just you, your vision, and everything you need to grow your business. Join thousands of entrepreneurs who are building their dream businesses with Kajabi. I've hosted my business on Kajabi since 2015, and spoiler alert, this podcast is hosted on Kajabi. You can even start your own podcast there. If you want to try Kajabi free for 30 days, click my link in the show notes and take that first step toward turning your passion into profit. Back to our show. And that was going to be one of my questions. I'm glad you answered it, is if we just, once we publish a podcast episode, is it copyright? Because I've heard in the past it was, and I didn't know if that was true or myth. So thank you for covering that.
And the funny thing with copyrights, it's automatically protected pretty much worldwide. There are a dozen of countries, maybe less. Like I know Afghanistan is one of them. That's not part of the Berne Convention for international protection of works of copyright, right? But basically, the second you finish that song, or the second you publish your podcast, it's protected everywhere.
Amazing.
And that's when they came up with different types of intellectual property laws back in the day, and there's completely separate protection for copyright, for trademarks, for patents. There was a method to their madness, right? They really wanted to make copyright protection really easy and really very, very, very long. Basically, it's the life of the author plus 2 generations after him automatically. But the scope of protection was very limited. Basically, as long as you didn't copy what they did, you could write about the same thing. You could talk about the same ideas. Like if someone interviews, if Joe Rogan interviews Bob Smith, it doesn't mean that you can't interview Bob Smith about exactly the same things and even ask him the same questions, right? So copyright, again, as easy it is to acquire, protects the owner of copyright for a very limited scope of things. Now, patents on the other end of the spectrum are extremely hard to get. There's very high threshold of what's patentable. But if you get there, after all the years of waiting, after all the money that you spent, what you can do with them is very, very, very strong. Basically, you can stop anyone from making products that use the same idea or the same method, and you can block international shipments into your country of products like that. So patents are very strong, right? And trademarks also differently. Again, they protect a very specific thing in very specific country for specific list of products and services. So that was their whole idea, right? So let's figure out what people are actually trying to protect with what type of intellectual property and give them, different combination of rights around it. The problem is that today's world is very different from the world that existed when they were coming up with all of those ideas.
Right.
And I would say today, the existing system was no longer adequate. Like the whole idea of trademark laws, for example, was designed around a few assumptions. The first assumption was that it is very hard for someone to expand their brand beyond one country and go international. The second assumption was that it's very hard and expensive for someone to add completely different new products and services on top of the ones that they started with, right? And that was true in 19th century.
Yeah.
And the assumption was, hey, if you have the money to go international, if you have the money to expand, you will have the time. Oh, and the third assumption was that copying was slow, right? So,
Yeah.
and so the assumption was if you have the money to expand, you do have the money to register your trademark in all of those countries, in all of those additional classes. Now, when someone who lives I don't know, in Pakistan in a basement can launch a business that goes global in a matter of hours, especially with AI, right?
Yeah.
And like the system wasn't built to allow them to protect their stuff internationally because they don't have the money yet. They're still in the basement, right? But they're trying to build something big. And so I don't know how they're going to deal with that. I think there will have to be a change to this global system of protection, but it's not there yet. So we have to play with what we got.
Right. So that makes me wonder then if someone trademarks, say, their podcast show name and they trademark it in Canada and the US, for
Okay.
example.
Yeah.
Let's say that's where their main audience is. Then can someone, but the podcast gets broadcast internationally. So what if someone in Scotland has a podcast by the same name trademarked there? How would that work?
It would work awkwardly,
Okay.
but that's how it works. Basically, nothing stops the Scotland trademarks office from registering a trademark that's identical to something that someone else owns in US or Canada.
Okay.
Again, that's how it works. And the if both parties have the funds to fight it out, and they actually do decide to do that, the likely outcome of that would be to prohibit the North American podcaster from making their podcast available in Scotland,
Okay.
and for the Scottish one from making their podcast available in the US and Canada. And if you go and if they use public platforms, that becomes even more awkward.
Yeah.
So YouTube sort of figured it out with making some of their content not available in some countries, and that's really why it's happening on the copyright side, but also could be on the trademarking side. So how you enforce it is a completely different question, and honestly it's a legal nightmare. There's I mean, we can talk about, you know, how it should be or how it could
Mm,
be, but in reality, there's really no good solution to that. And
okay.
so what it boils down to is you really need to figure out what is your main market,
Okay.
right? If you really want to stay inside Scotland, well, maybe you don't really care about protecting your brand in North America. That would be very limiting, and that
Yep.
would be and that would work for someone whose business interests really are that local. But beyond
Yeah.
that, you probably want to look at the biggest markets and you want to own the brand there. And that most part of the English speaking world starts with US, and Canada is usually the second part of that. Even if you're Canadian, right?
Yeah.
And I know there's interesting time for Canadians right now in terms of how they feel about the US, but love it or hate it, US is still the biggest market out there. And if you are not protecting your brand in both, you're not really being very pragmatic about what's going to happen a few years from now. I'm going to tell you a funny story. So I went to an international conference a few months ago, and so met a bunch of colleagues from other countries. So it was basically a conference of a trademarking conference, right? And so talked to a bunch of trademark attorneys from different countries, and I spoke to one from Russia, right? And you know that Russia has been sanctioned pretty much by everybody for everything. Still, they're the third large country in terms of the number of trademarks being filed there every year. So China is
Wow.
by far number one. US, with a huge gap, is number two. And then comes Russia. More than
Wow.
Canada, more than European Union. And that's, to me, that's interesting. And the idea is, today is today, but there's always going to be tomorrow. And if you're not protected, if you don't have protection for the times when they change, you're going to have a big problem on your hands. So again, if you're in Canada and you hate America, that's fine, but make sure that no one in America can steal your brand.
Right.
Same thing with Americans, right? If you look down at Canadians for whatever reason you think they deserve to be the 51st state, that's cool. But
Yeah.
If you have a brand in US, but someone else has the same brand in Canada, you are going to have a marketing disaster on your hands. Because
Right.
what are you going to do? You're going to be promoting two separate brands in in two jurisdictions that are neighboring. It's going to cost a lot more money. It's going to create customer confusion. And why would you do that? So again, no, that doesn't matter what your politics are. And I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of loud opinions about that, and they probably should, one way or the other. But it doesn't still means that you want to protect your brand and kind of your most important markets that are likely to generate revenue and long-term profits for you.
Okay.
I think I'm
Good.
answering all the wrong questions, but I'm hoping it
No, no,
makes for an interesting conversation.
it does. This is fascinating. Now, what about individual episode names? Because this question also came up in my training, and people were like, well, what if I name my episode something and then unknowingly someone else has also called an episode by that same episode name? Is that protected? Can I get in trouble for that? And my first thought was, well, there's millions of episodes out there. Like, how would you even know? So should that be something we're concerned with?
Most likely not. Most
Okay.
likely not, unless it's something so unbelievably original and creative. That one episode that the phrase that you used in the title is worth, you know, worth millions. That would be like I can't even come up with an example for something like that, to be
Yeah,
honest.
fair enough.
But we all know situations when, as for example, athletes, they they say something on the way, of the field, and that becomes their tagline worth millions, right?
Yeah.
So that happens. So if you realize that you've said something during your podcast that you keep saying, it doesn't even need to be the title, but it's more of a tagline, really. So
Mhm.
if you realize that you keep saying something and people react really well to that, that's the thing to trademark. How you say, my episode with this or that person, but it's not really a name. It's not really a title worth trademarking. Or I'm talking with Teri about intellectual property. Well, there's nothing to trademark there. A trademark is supposed to be um, um, you trademark something that protects a brand, right? A brand is something that allows people to tell one person who's offering certain services or products from the other person who's doing exactly the same thing. Like we talked about it in the first episode, like the toothpaste
Yeah.
example, right?
Yeah.
And very rarely would the name of the episode be so distinctive that it would identify the source of the product, i.e., the podcast itself. So the name of the podcast might be protected by copyright. So different countries look differently as to whether titles of works of copyright are protectable by themselves. Most countries do allow that as long as the name is original. Some countries, for example, US, specifically say that the title is not copyrightable
Yeah.
because it's so short and they don't want to create unnecessary litigation around that. But really, if you came up with something, like if you came up with a title that you think is worth its weight in gold, it's
Mhm.
probably more than just the title. You probably are using this somewhere else, and you're probably using it in more than one episode. And if that's the case, then yes, for sure, it's something that you should consider trademarking. But if it's just a random name for a random episode and you've got hundreds of them and you think that every single one of them is so amazing, probably not.
Probably not, no. No, I know mine aren't. I'm not that creative. They're pretty straightforward.
And really, that's not where your creative focus really should go. We all know those entrepreneurs who are going to agonize for months over how their logo should look like
Mhm.
and not even bother to launch their product to the market and see if the market even cares. And they're like, well, I'm just
Right.
polishing the seventh version of the logo. I got the new designer team. They're gonna, once it's done, I'm gonna launch, in 3 months from now. Like, dude, do you even know that people care about the product? Right. So
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Like if you're agonizing over naming every single one of your episodes of your podcast, you're focusing on the wrong.
Oh, such good advice. So good. And then what about things like if someone's reviewing someone else's material? So if they're doing a podcast or a YouTube channel where they're talking about a movie or they're talking about another podcast, for example, or referencing other material, what should we be aware of there?
That's a great question. So, and that's where copyright becomes a little bit of a gray
Okay.
area and gray line between what's infringement and what's use for the purposes of critiquing someone else's work.
Okay.
And my rule of thumb when I try to explain this like I would to a 9-year-old is that if the extent of you using someone else's podcast or someone else's show, someone else's something is to allow the world to see more of that other podcast for free,
Hmm.
or if your goal is to mostly basically draw attention to yourself at the expense of that other thing, you may be in danger zone. If you're
Okay.
actually adding some value by sharing your opinion, by using the just as much as necessary to prove your point, that's perfectly okay. That's what fair use and fair dealing exemptions were designed for. So that if you have an opinion that you think the world wants to know, that's okay for you to use someone else's work without permission. Like I'm gonna give you two examples, kind of illustrate this point. Let's use music. Let's say I love a song, whatever, any song, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that I'm gonna get a following if I just play that song, say, whatever. Wasp, I want to be somebody. Like the
Yeah.
first song that came to mind, right? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to play that song and I'm going to place my face on top of it. And I'm just going to do this, right? Nothing else. It doesn't add any value, really. All I'm doing is I'm using someone else's track to draw attention to me, right?
Okay.
That's a problem. I should get permission from them. If I'm like, let's break down why this was such a successful song, right? We can talk about the intro. We can talk about the chorus. We can talk about the verse. We can talk about the video that they did. See what they did here, right? If I actually explain
Hmm.
some things so that adds value, some value,
Yeah.
right? And again, I'm not playing it from start to finish. I'm using snippets from it to make a point. That's okay, right? And again, this is not a black and white answer, right? At some point, there will still be gray area. And the way I
Yeah.
look at it is because I'm originally copyright lawyer by training, right? You know my story. I started because of my dad, who was a composer in Russia whose music got stolen, and so I've always been of the opinion that people who create amazing stuff deserve not to have it stolen from them. They deserve to not be robbed of control of saying whether or not they want the world to to have access to their stuff in this form. So the way I look at it is that um, if someone strongly opposes you using their stuff in your content, I think it's good ethics to actually not, as much as you want, get their permission or don't use it. So it's okay to assume that the fair dealing, fair use exception applies to you, but if they're actively opposing, maybe give them enough respect and take it down. That's what I would do, right? It's not legal advice. It's human advice, because
Yeah.
nobody likes their stuff to be screwed with, right? And the person who's doing that podcast would probably just as much not like someone else to do something they wouldn't want with their content, right? And it may be, under different circumstances, but there are situations when bad publicity is not good. And so, you would want them to listen to how you feel about that. So why don't you listen to how they feel about their content? So that's kind of my take on this. Again, whether
Yeah.
or not you could get away with that in court, don't do stuff that hurts other people. That's kind of my go-to advice.
Great advice. And then what do we do if, say, we accidentally use someone's copyrighted material or a trademark and we don't know, and they come to us, like what is our next step as the creator to correct that? Is it just take it down or change the name or
It depends what you do accidentally, right? If you
okay.
accidentally start a business that's called Microsoft Software Solutions, like you didn't know. I mean, look, this is a funny example, but like you can name a business that has the same name as somebody else's trademark, right? And whether you did it accidentally or deliberately doesn't matter. If someone registered a trademark, you are deemed to have known about it because it's public information. So they can go after you. They can force you to rebrand. They can claim all the revenue that you made
Uh,
under the brand that is actually theirs and not yours, right? Whether you knew about it or not. And intent is not a part of that,
okay.
part of that equation. With copyright, intent does play a role. Uh, but again, intent is seen from what you actually do. If like, and that's the funny thing with copyright. In theory, two people can independently create the same tune or write the same poem, right?
Yeah.
The longer it is, obviously, the less likely it is to be accidental. But if you can prove that you had no access to the other person's work and you just wrote it on your own, two people will own copyright for exactly the same thing.
Wow.
So unlike with trademarks. So if if you talk about something on your show and you quote and it's okay, right? You are allowed to mention other people's brands protected by copyright, like when I mentioned Microsoft Software Solutions or Joe Rogan or whatever other brands we've talked about. I'm not infringing on their trademarks because I'm not selling any products that compete with theirs under that brand. I'm just mentioning,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's okay. If I were to, like, in illustration of my thought about Wasp song, say, you know what, let's take a break and listen to this amazing song for 4 minutes, and I would just have you play it. That'd be a problem. But whether I know about it or not is really irrelevant. So again, use common sense, and usually, if you use common sense and your decency, you will avoid most of the problems.
When it comes to social media, and there are a lot of people that copy other people's social media content or reuse it in ways that maybe the original creator did not approve or does not want. Is there any protection for that kind of creation, or is that just a free for all on social media?
uh, there's a big difference between being right by law and actually doing something about it.
Okay.
So the owners or the creators of the original content that's being copied probably might have the legal right to do something with the copiers, right?
Okay.
But it's impractical for them to actually go out there and enforce their stuff. So again,
Yeah.
as long as it's kind of minimal and you're not constantly being a parasite of just one channel,
Hmm.
you're probably going to get away with that, even if it's not strictly legal, right? But if, for example, so I'm just going to give you an example. So let's say let's say I'm a fan of Alex Hermosi, right? And so let's say he puts out a video and I'm like, wow, that's a great video. Why don't I, repurpose that video and do something similar on my channel? If I do once, if I do it once, he probably won't even notice. If I do it a couple of times, he might notice, but probably be just a little bit annoyed and do nothing about it. But if I take every single video that he puts out, run it through AI, and change it, like, because now the technologies are amazing, right? You can probably take someone's video and replace the talking face with your talking face. You're saying exactly the same thing, right? So
Yeah.
let's say I automated something like this. I'd probably see a letter from his lawyers pretty soon. So again, it boils down to how nasty you want to play this and how much you're going to piss them off. At some point, you're going to go beyond what they're willing to tolerate, and at that point, it becomes a big problem.
What is the process like for if, you know, people are listening and they're thinking I should trademark my podcast name or my YouTube channel name or logo, or what do we do next? What's the next step?
Next step is trademarkfactory.com.
Mhm.
That's your one-stop shop for protecting your brand
Yeah.
in US and Canada. And we are known for trademarking services with a guaranteed result for a guaranteed budget. So we make sure that you don't waste any time and money trying to trademark something that will be refused. And if we see that your brand is not trademarkable, we want to tell you about it as early as possible so that you have an opportunity to switch to something that is ownable, as much as it might hurt in the beginning.
Yeah.
And we have packages that basically have you prepay for unlimited amount of attorney hours spent on follow-up communication with a trademarks office, and one of them even has 100% money back guarantee. So
Amazing.
I don't want to do too much selling on your show, but really the easiest way to get started and figure out what best works for you, go to trademarkfactory.com, book your free call with one of our strategy advisors. They're not just there collecting your credit card. They're there to help you actually figure out what you should start with, where, how, and things like that. And if you see that there's a good fit, they'll help you get started.
Perfect. And it's, and I will say I have been a client of Trademark Factory, and I appreciated how streamlined everything was. And I think a lot of small business owners think, well, I can just do it myself. But
Yeah.
there's, like we were talking about before we start recording, you don't know what you don't know. And it's going to cost a lot of time and money and headaches to try to go your own way, I think.
So the cool thing about this, we are about to launch a brand new version of the client cabinet. All of our clients have a client cabinet where we are very transparent about the status of all their trademarks that we're handling for them. The new version is a billion times better than the one we had before. It's actually going to show
Cool.
you the full history for each trademark. It will have all the links on the website, on our website, on the Trademarks Office's website, and be a
Yeah.
lot clearer in terms of where you are right now, what we want from you. Uh, I'm like for renewals, for office actions, all of
Wow.
that stuff. So I'm very, very, very excited about that. So you're going to see that in April sometime. And you're absolutely right. The trademarking process is much more complicated than most people realize. They think that, well,
Mhm.
I'm just going to file the application and that's it, like a domain name. No, it takes
Yeah.
over a year in the US, takes over 3 years in Canada. There's a billion moving parts there. And unless you know how to handle them, and most people don't, your trademark will be denied. The problem with that is there's no immediate reaction from the trademark's office. So it's not
Right.
like, again, like a domain name where you say, I want to own this domain name, and say, you can't, right? With trademark, you file your trademark application and they say, great, you filed your trademark application, and you think you're done. But then 9 months into the process, they tell you what you filed cannot be accepted. And you've spent these 9 months trying to promote this brand, and you had no idea, right? So it's critical for you to, first of all, know that what you're filing is trademarkable. And it's a lot more than just doing a knockout search for identical trademarks out there. There's a lot
Yeah.
more that goes into that. But once you know that it is trademarkable, it's also about filing it in the correct classes with correct descriptions. All of that is about getting it done right. And we see a lot of people who file their trademarks almost like a marketing material. They try to convince the trademarks office that they have the best products in the world. They tell the story of how they came up with it. The trademarks office doesn't care. They care about the application being done in a very particular manner. And again, unless you know what you're doing, most likely you're going to get your trademark application denied. And with Trademark Factory, we have so I we have the success rate of 99.3%, right? Compare that
Nice.
to industry average of 51.2, right?
Wow.
I think we have the highest success rate in the industry, but again, I don't know everyone else's, so I'm going to say we have one of the highest success rates in the industry. And there's a reason behind this discrepancy, right? Almost twice. But if you look at the failure rate, our failure rate is 0.7 compared to what, 48% for everyone else, right?
That's amazing.
There's a reason behind that. We have a team who really know what they're doing and who really give a damn about the clients and their brands, and we do whatever it takes to get their brands trademarked.
Amazing. One final question. This came from my previous guest, Destiny Cop. So, what I'm doing now is different from last time you were on, is that giving each guest the option to pass along a question to the
Nice.
next guest without knowing who they are. So, the question that Destiny passed along for you is, what's one thing in your life that you would change for your future self? So, if 5 years down the road, what do you think you should be doing today to make your future self better?
Huh. What should I do differently today, or what should I just do today?
What should you do today to make your future self better?
Focus on being happy today. Focus on doing things that make me happy today, as opposed to focusing on taking as much pain as I can today in order to maybe be happy 5 years from now. I think that we as entrepreneurs and founders, sometimes we punish ourselves more than we should.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that expecting that the world is going to reward us with something amazing if we suffer just about enough.
Yeah.
And it's not how it works. I mean, there are, again, as much as I love Alex Hermosi and Gary V, not everyone's going to build a business like theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone's going to have the traits that they do have. Not everyone needs to work 20 hours a day to get to where they want. And it really boils down to, what do you actually want? Not every one of us is going to build a $1 billion company, and it doesn't mean that we failed.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the biggest realizations that I had recently. To me, yeah, the message is, you know, the happiness in the future is not the reward for misery today. Happiness is in the future is basically the continuation of the happiness that starts today, that can start today. There's always something good we can do today, even if we don't make enough money, if we don't have everything going the way we want. There's always something we can find in today's life that uh, that's good enough for you to notice and be happy about. So probably that.
Fantastic answer. I love that. That's great advice for everyone listening. And what's a question you would like to pass along to the next guest without knowing who they are?
I have no idea. Okay, so I don't know what they are. Wow. um. Okay. That's it. That's what is. This actually going to be a question that ties into the little conversation you and I had before we started recording. So,
Perfect.
how do you know when you don't know that you don't know, and what do you do about it?
Well, that's a great question. That's a good one. Love it. Thank you so much for coming on today. And any last words you want to leave the audience with?
if you have a brand that you're building, that you're actually spending any time and money trying to put in people's minds, hearts, and memories, you want to make sure that you own it. You want to make sure that you won't be that person who is going to end up building a brand that's valuable only to find out that it's not yours. So make sure you do the right steps to trademark it early on. And sometimes, again, it comes with the pain of finding out that the name you came up with is not the name you can own. Rebrand before you've got thousands and thousands of followers, and start on the right note and build it into an asset that's going to make you money in the future. So trademarkfactory.com is going to help you with that. Again, thank you, Teri, for the opportunity to be with you. I always love having these with you because your questions are so good every time. So really,
Thank you.
really,
I
really awesome.
appreciate that. Thanks.